And welcome back. We're now all the way into chapter 2. Chapter 2 is called What is Consent? And the first place we're going to start is around consent and the law. We'll look at a couple different definitions. We'll look at a couple of the legal aspects. And that can be a really great sort of foundation to understand the most basic parts of consent. It is not the end of the story, though. The law doesn't actually cover everything that we need to know and understand to really be doing consent properly. It just gives you the most basic snapshot of a starting place. So we will start there also, get in touch with a few of those definitions. And the handout for this section is called The Law Where You Live, because you might be watching this from a certain country, province, state, where the laws themselves can be subtly different. And while, of course, we know there's much more to consent than just the law itself, it can still be helpful to understand your most basic starting place itself, though, for what consent in terms of legal in your area is. So what we want to start with in terms of what makes consent legal is the very first thing to understand is there's something around consent called capacity to consent. The capacity to consent means before anything else matters of who said yes or no or what else happened, the capacity to consent is should any consent have kind of taken place to begin with. So there's certain sort of upfront things that make something an okay idea to think about even becoming intimate with each other. And certain things where it really doesn't matter who wants to do what, it's not okay, and there's important reasons for that. So a couple things around capacity consent that would make something not okay. The first sort of category of that is around age. So age, we all know, of course, young children can't consent to sexual intimacy. They're not emotionally developed or mature. It's not a safe or okay thing for young children to be doing sexual things, especially with adults. And then there's sort of a range sometimes that's given in the law within peers and who can do what with each other. So age, so we know there's usually an age limit. Again, every state, country, and everything else can be slightly different. So look up your specific area. I know, so I'm speaking from Canada. In my area, the age, for instance, is 16 is the age of consent. So anyone over 16 can consent. And then there's a range. So where 12 and 13-year-olds can consent to sexual intimacy within someone, a 2-year range. So 12 could be with a 13 or a 14-year-old. A 13-year-old could be with a 14 or 15-year-old. Older than that, and it's not okay. Again, the developmental and emotional capacity is too much of a spread. So it's not deemed safe or appropriate or legal in this case. And then sort of 15 or 14 and 15, there's a 5-year age spread. So a 14-year-old could be with again, anywhere from 15, 16, 17, 18. And that's the range. So again, it's that 5-year upwards spread in those age groups. And then in Canada, 16 and up. So the reason I like to mention this model, even if you're not from Canada, obviously understand the laws where you live. But the idea that there is a developmental readiness in terms of our peers versus what starts to become not okay with adults. Something that can sometimes happen in those sort of early teen years is we may get advances from older people who are interested in us. And sometimes we can find that very flattering, that, we're seen as older or more mature. And that can seem like a boost to our ego. I want you to really encourage to fight that feeling because it's not legal and it's not okay. And the person on the other end of that age spectrum should not be pursuing you. It's not developmentally appropriate. It's not a safe or healthy interaction, and it is actually illegal. So if you have someone much older that's ever been expressing interest in you in a sexual or romantic way, please do reach out and tell someone, tell a parent, tell a teacher, even though there may be those little feelings of an ego boost or whatever. It's normal and natural, but it still isn't actually okay or healthy for that person to be doing that. Okay, so that's a legal age piece. So the age itself, the next big piece around capacity to consent, something that's not okay, even if both people think they say yes, is something called power relationships. So power relationships are when, even if people aren't aware of it on the inside, there are factors that are changing people's ability to feel like they can truly say yes or truly say no. So this is, for instance, a teacher to a student. So even if they fit in that age range, someone 16 or older, in Canada again, that the relationship of a teacher to a student is not a safe one for those types of interactions to be happening. It is illegal. It is not okay. And that teacher should not be pursuing that. So this is the same with coaches to their athletes. This is the same with, in most cases, bosses to their employees. If it's not in writing legally, it's not appropriate anyway, whether it's in writing or not. So anyone that generally has power over another person, ministers to their congregation, counselors to their clients, doctors to their patients, anyone who's in a position of power or authority to another person, that's not okay. So that's not a legal capacity to consent. Of course, there's also family relationships. So it's not actually okay or healthy under any circumstances for family members to be engaging in any type of sexual relationship with each other. This is other than, the parents, but sort of parent to child, aunts and uncles. Those types of things are not okay. If anything's ever happened to you, or of anything's happened to someone else in those areas, to please sort of tell someone, even if it's someone you love or even like, or those types of things. It's still very important to talk about it, because that relationship needs to go back to healthy, if it's gone somewhere unhealthy like that. Then there's, of course, a legal capacity to consent around consciousness. So this is now involving drugs and alcohol, or anything else that might make us incapacitated sort of mentally. We will talk more about drugs and alcohol later on in some of the videos, but as a starting place, if someone has, for instance, drank so much alcohol that they're sort of slurring or kind of passing out, or they can't really stand up, or those types of things, they're not mentally all there. So they can't consciously, legally give capacity to consent. So even if someone's like, this is my being drunk face, right? Well, yeah, I'm totally into that. That's not good. But you know what I mean. If someone's saying yes, but they're showing those signs of drunkenness, that's still not consent. So a yes under those kind of circumstances still isn't a yes. It's still not legal. There was no capacity to consent. Doesn't count, not legal. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Don't do it. So that's the consciousness. Lastly, there's a piece in the law around what's called ability. So sometimes there might be vulnerable people, either whether it's sort of a physical disability or vulnerability, a sort of developmental sort of incapacity or disability, or some other piece that might make someone not able to give consent, even though they might meet the legal age standard. Maybe developmentally they're not developmentally 16-year-olds, even if their body is 16-year-old. So those are other pieces to kind of consider as well. So once each of those pieces is sort of looked at individually, then the next two pieces are that consent has to be freely given. So a yes, but one that's been coerced or manipulated or forced or bullied or pressured, or asked over and over and over again, and you get a yes, it's still not a legal yes. So that's not a freely given yes. A freely given yes has to be like, would you like to have dinner? Yes, I would, without being like, no, we gotta have dinner, right? So around sex and intimacy, it's, do you want to go, make out on the couch? And the other person's like, oh, that's a really great idea. Like, I'm totally into that. Let's go. Then that's freely given. But if someone's sort of coming at you, be like, come on, like, I really want to, and like, I'm thinking about this all night, and like, you're so hot, and you're so this, and someone keeps coming at you after you've sort of hesitated or said no, that's no longer a freely given yes. Okay. And then the last piece is it also has to be affirmative. So affirmative means that what we sort of talked about last time too, it's not just everything's a green light until you get a no. It's saying, do you have someone that's specifically saying yes? Not just an absence of no. It's, hey, would you like to? Like, this would be a cool thing. Are you into it? And the other person's like, yeah, cool. That's awesome. I'm totally there. Like, let's go. Kind of situation. Okay, so capacity, freely given, and affirmative, and that creates the foundation of our legal basis of consent. There's spaces on here, coming back to our handout. There's spaces on here to also jot down laws around pornography and the age that might be listed in your area where you live, other considerations. I also have on there a section, because this is really big right now, of course, whether you've heard about it or read about it, but it's around sending or sexting pictures or nudes. The laws haven't quite caught up with technology yet, so we don't want to just base what we do sometimes on laws. We want to do it on what's actually right under the broader understanding of consent. So there some things to be aware of is that there are age limits to what's considered child pornography. If you're under a certain age and you're sending nude pictures, most of you may have heard this by now, but obviously that's not okay. That being said, it's also nothing to feel guilty or ashamed about either, if you have curiosity or those types of things. So it's, again, finding that balance and staying safe. Again, remembering what you put out there in terms of visual stuff or sending it over the internet. Pictures never die. They never go away. And even if you trust someone in the moment, sometimes things change in the future. One of the things about consent, which we'll talk about in the next video, is it has to have the ability to be changeable. And if you give someone a picture and later on you'd say, I don't want you to have that anymore, and the person says, tough luck, or they don't know how to delete it properly, maybe it's innocent, that's still not okay. So we do want to be very careful with that. So there's a space there to note some legal things around nudes. It's not something you have to do, even if it's, again, we talked about from the myths and facts section last time of it's expected, or like it's something you have to do as like a life stage or thing that you're supposed to experience. It's not true. You don't have to. Okay. Couple other pieces. There's also a spot to note the definition around sexual harassment and sexual assault. And I actually left off here the definition of rape, which we've left off because it's actually a bit of an outdated term, and we'll go over why. So let's start back with sexual harassment. So sexual harassment is behavior characterized by the making of unwelcome and inappropriate sexual remarks or physical advances against another person. So basically, if someone is giving you signs that they don't want your flirting or touching or whatever it may be, and you keep going, that can be defined as sexual harassment. Sexual assault is any unwanted sexual act done by one person to another. So this is more encompassing. The reason I talk about sexual assault as the better term often than rape is the definition of rape specifically involves penetrative intercourse. So again, a female to female interaction or other genders, this may not be how an assault takes place. So sexual assault can often sort of encompass a broader understanding of what that is. Okay, so you may want to look up, again, those specific areas where you live. And then there's also the last little spot to kind of really get specific around consent in your area. So where you live, are there any specific laws to know, any ways that they break down some of those things we went over more broadly? Remembering that this isn't the end all and be all of consent, it's just very much a starting place, and we're going to build off of that. Okay, so from here, the next video is going to start to look at, again, more specifics of what really makes consent more practical, more real life. How do you do it so it's actually respectful and proper from the ground up? We'll start there next.